We are out here at Lancaster Harley Davidson, getting ready to hop on the 2022 Harley Davidson Street Bob. We're going to tell you everything you need to know before you buy this bike. Alright everybody, what is up? What is up? As always, thanks for stopping by to another video today. As you can see, like I mentioned, we just left Lancaster Harley Davidson. So we are on the lovely streets of Lancaster, Pennsylvania this afternoon. This has been such a good day of riding out here. I mean, this is just a part of it. Like, I left Philly pretty early in the morning, headed out Route 23, took that all the way out to Lancaster. Yeah, there's a lot quicker ways to get out here, but 23 is kind of like a little bit of like a back roadish way to get out here. Stopped at Spring House Brewery, made my way down there to Lancaster Harley Davidson, and now we are headed on our way back into the city. And man, this day of riding has been really good so far. I hope it continues that way. But like I said, I think it's time to talk about everything you need to know before you buy a Harley Davidson Softail Street Bob. And this will kind of encompass both the 107 and 114. Obviously the frame and everything like that is exactly the same. Only difference really being kind of the engine, paint schemes, and different stuff like that. But a lot of this is really going to be very applicable to both variations there, the 107, the 114, because like I said, they're very similar. But I think a lot of times the reason I want to get a lot of this info out there from my experience, to just kind of let you guys know, let this be a resource for anybody out there that's interested in this bike, or anybody that agrees or disagrees with some of these comments that I'll make on the bike, just to kind of give people a heads up. I think a lot of times motorcycles can be very much like an impulse buy. You find the one you want, you like it, you go get it, you test ride it. But then later on down the road, you know, you might find stuff that, you know, maybe you fall in love with it even more. Maybe you find stuff that you didn't even realize that you actually don't like, or it doesn't fit your intended purposes, or things like that. And that's why I want to try to get as much of that out in this video from at least my experience so far, to kind of help out anybody that would have those questions or need some of that info before they might be interested in getting this bike. So there will be a couple different parts I'll go through. I'll hop off the bike here shortly. I want to go through like looks and everything, all these different things that you want to consider about the bike in general, because looks and kind of layout and form, function, ergonomics, all those different things are definitely things that you want to kind of take into consideration, and things that you want to know before buying this bike. Then we'll hop back on. We'll talk about power, handling, who's it for, who's it not for, where you want to ride it, where you don't want to ride it, things you might have to change to kind of fit your style and need, all that good stuff. Alright, so let's just pull over in this little random area here. Have no idea what this is. Alright, so let's start this thing off with looks first. Like, what do you want to consider when you're looking at getting a Harley Davidson Softail Street Bob? So first off, I talk about this a lot. Very basic, simple, stripped down bike. Basically, you're getting a pretty powerful mid-sized cruiser. The bike is coming in about 650 pounds, but it is still pretty easy to maneuver and handle, even at around 650 pounds. So other things to consider just kind of from the looks of this, obviously you're getting this thing stripped down. You've got this digital speedo here. We'll take a closer look at this. This is something that you definitely want to consider if you want more technology or analog or stuff like that. You're just not going to get it with this bike. So we'll turn it on here real quick. Like I said, you are going to get all the info you need here. You've got your little indicators, you've got your dash that you can cycle through, trip A, trip B, fuel range. You've got a gas gauge right here, time, speed, and RPMs. That's about it. So definitely something to consider there. Definitely something to know or realize what you're getting yourself into if you're interested in this bike. Very simple, not a lot of technology, not much going on here, stripped down up front. Next up, to go along with that theme, again, I've talked a little bit about this before too. Keep in mind, just a very simple, basic, kind of middleweight type cruiser. You've got a single disc up front. You've got your regular suspension here. It's not inverted, anything like that. Kind of falling in line with that bobber style. You're going to come with mid controls right here. Depending on which variation you get, 107 or 114, you might already have the passenger pegs. It does come stock with a seat here in the pillion pad, again, depending on which model. I've got this switched out with a Lepera kickflip, obviously. So that's one of the main things is to know about this bike, is really kind of take into consideration those factors of it's just very simple and basic. Again, you're not going to have any bags on this thing. You're going to have to put those on yourself. So storage is definitely something to consider. I know some people that have gotten into this bike and they're like, oh, I don't need storage, all this and that. And then they start wearing a backpack all the time. They don't like it. And then they start throwing bags on here, or they upgrade to a bagger. So like I kind of said at the beginning, there's all these little things that you kind of realize, like it's very obvious. You know, you look at this bike, it's simple, it's stripped down, there's no storage, there's nothing like that. But you just kind of don't realize it till once you get into it and you get into the everyday application of the bike. So then you start to realize, and you might have thought, well, maybe I do want all that stuff, and then you get into a situation where you might want or need something else. Something else to consider with this bike is the handlebars as well. So these come with, I believe this is a 10-inch mini ape. Depending on your size and reach, the combination of the mid controls and the bars might be a little uncomfortable for you. That's one thing I'll be totally honest with. The stock setup of this bike is not entirely great. So as you can see right here, I've had to roll these bars back because I'm about 5'6", I'm shorter. If these bars are up forward, it was super uncomfortable for me at first. So take into consideration the positioning of these bars. You might have to swap them out. That's something I really tell people that they need to understand and know about this bike. Again, it seems like a simple thing, but once you get on there, thing might be a little uncomfortable for you. I had to pull these back to really get this in a good, comfortable spot. Now, the next thing you want to know about this bike and take into consideration with these mid controls is these aren't as bad as people say. Everybody says, oh, I had to throw forwards on it, I had to get the controls up here, da-da-da. This is kind of a mid forward. Like look where this is. This is kind of already a little bit farther than a normal mid. To me, obviously, mid on like my Sportster is like right here. My knee's totally bent. I'm shorter. I can kind of stretch out a little bit. If you're in that like 5 foot to 5'8" range, this is not going to be as bad as some people will tell you it is. Everybody out there is always saying, oh, you got to throw forwards on this if you're above this height. I don't know. I just disagree. Go ahead, test ride it for yourself. Something to definitely consider about this. Now, again, with these mids being right here, if this is something that concerns you, that's something you're going to have to take into consideration. Something you should know as well. You might have to move these controls out if you're not happy where they are. And kind of one of the final things from the looks perspective off the bike, obviously, this is a Memphis Shades Road Warrior fairing. I put this on aftermarket. For those of you who don't know, this bike does come stock naked up front. You're not going to have any of this up there. If wind and wind protection is an issue for you, again, this is going to be naked. Stock out of the showroom floor, you're going to get all that wind in your face. So if wind is something that you don't want, or you're taking that into consideration, that's definitely something that you should know or think about before getting this. You're going to have to put something on there if you want to. If the wind is not a problem for you, hey, go ahead and leave it bare up there if that's what you like, if that's what you want. Then you're in good shape. You got nothing up there up front. Like I said, a lot of this stuff seems pretty obvious when you think about it at first, but another thing with the Street Bob, obviously you're getting the all blacked out look. You got about 3 or 4 different colors you can choose from depending on the model year. But once again, it's another thing I tell people to take that into consideration, because I've seen people that get into this bike and then they tell me, oh, I don't like the blacked out stuff, oh, I don't like to clean this or that, I wanted chrome. Well, I mean, that's something you got to take into consideration here. That's something you should know and think about before you get one of these. You're getting the all blacked out matte look. Whatever color you choose, you're good to go there. So another thing to consider, I would say, is your seat and seating position. This kind of comes back to the stock mid controls, mid pegs as well. I will say the stock seat is going to sit you down lower into this frame. You can see here my Lepera kickflip has me raised up a little bit, which was really good for opening my knee angle while riding. So another thing to take into consideration here, I know a lot of people are going to change out the seat, but the stock seat is going to sit you down lower into this frame, and it's going to have a weird angle on your leg. Like I said, I'll be honest, the stock setup with the stock bars, stock seat and pegs from the factory on this bike is not great. That's something you definitely want to take into consideration when you are considering this bike. There's a lot of stuff you're probably going to want to change out here, just like on every bike, but stock one on this is a little worse. But hey, you know, that's the fun part, modify all this stuff and change it up. So I think that's everything I got from that visual looks and setup of the bike. We're going to hop on this thing now. We'll talk a little bit about power, who's it's for, where you want to ride this thing, and what you want to do with this bike, all those different things to take into consideration for your situation. Alrighty, so back on the bike now. Man, I love riding on these Lancaster roads. I'm gonna have to get out here more often. But so anyways, we're back on the bike now. Some things to consider, you know, when you think about the actual like riding and function, handling of this bike and everything. Obviously, it's got the Milwaukee 8 114. I mean, I don't know, not a whole lot to consider there if you've ever ridden one. They're kind of all the same. It's a pretty good power plant for this bike, I will say. One thing that you want to know, one thing you want to consider is this bike is about 650 pounds, so it is one of the lighter bikes that has the Milwaukee 8, so that's kind of a nice piece to that. You get all that power that some of the baggers have and about 300 pounds less. So that's a good thing. But I think it's about 1850 cc's, somewhere in the neighborhood of like 85-ish, 90 something horsepower. I don't know the numbers, never know the numbers there. And then they also claim 120 foot-pounds of torque, so it is pretty powerful. That's one thing to take into consideration. Definitely a pretty good power on a mid-sized cruiser like this. The power on this thing is gonna let you have a lot of fun. You're gonna grow into it a little bit. Once you even grow into it and get used to it, it's gonna be even more fun. So no kind of complaints or qualms with the power there. That's one thing to take into consideration if you're a newer rider. I've already made a full video on this, but if you're a newer rider, maybe be careful, get 500 to 1,000 miles under your belt. If you're experienced, you're good to go. I wouldn't worry too much about the power either way. You know, I'm saying if you're experienced and good to go, it's going to be enough to keep you happy. If you're not as experienced, you know, you're going to be able to grow into this and have a good time, do some engine work to it if you want, beef this thing up even more. That's one thing to know about these Milwaukee 8s, is there's plenty of room to squeeze out more and more power on these. Next up, the thing you want to know is this thing handles pretty well, pretty agile. This Softail frame is a ton of fun to ride. Not the most comfortable at times. I will say, you know, there's times I wish it maybe was more comfortable. All right, so this is strange. We got a quick, obvious change of scenery here. I had pulled over because I was having some camera issues while recording that coming out of Lancaster. Camera wasn't working right, something wasn't going on, so I stopped. Just kept going from Lancaster, hit up Route 30, kept coming east towards Philly, pulled over again. I was like, oh, let me check this thing, see if it's working, and now the camera's working, so I don't know. Now we're on Route 30 East, Lancaster Ave, coming through the main line, headed back east into the city, but obviously, as we can see, it's not as much fun. We got car dealerships, cars, traffic, lights everywhere. Not nearly as nice as where we were, but we got to get home somehow. Anyways, where was I? I was at comfort and handling. So yeah, just to wrap up that point, basically not the most comfortable, but I mean, you know, I'm coming off a Sportster, so anything's more comfortable than that. It's going to handle perfect, it's going to handle fine. You can do some upgrades to enhance any of that, obviously, if you want to. So this is actually, brings me up to another good point. As you can see where I just was out in Lancaster, a lot of good just regular cruising, open road, stuff like that. It's really good for that. That's one thing to take into consideration. It also handles itself pretty well in traffic. I would say it's pretty decent in traffic, but it's not the most ideal place for this bike. Traffic in the city urban environment is not my favorite place for any bike, really. But when you take into combination the power and the weight of the bike, I would say the stop and go, all that stuff is just a little bit more rough than a smaller bike. That's one thing to consider, you know, depending on where you are, where you're going to be riding and stuff like that. I tend not to take it into the city too much, so that's one thing just to consider. You're definitely going to want to use the power and handling and stuff. You don't want to be stop and go traffic at any time, really, but that's probably a whole other separate video in itself that I'll do. My experience with this thing around the city, how it handles, tight spaces, stop, go, all that good stuff. I'll probably give a full-on review of that stuff later, but back to that point, I mean, this bike really is going to take you anywhere you want and do anything you want it to. You're going to be able to go on long hauls. Like, I'm wrapping up like 150 miles on this trip that I was on today. You're going to be able to do like short scoots through your town, bar hop, whatever you want to do. The one thing you're going to want to take into consideration with that again is this is a 3.5 gallon gas tank. So that's obviously something you want to know and be aware of before purchasing this motorcycle. 3.5 gallons, I would say it does get pretty decent gas mileage actually. I can get, depending on the riding I'm doing, if I'm out there traveling, I can get almost upward of 140, 150 miles to a tank. If I'm around town, depending on how I'm riding, stop and go, all that stuff, it's a little more like 100 to 110. I would say tank size and fuel capacity is a pretty big thing you should know about any bike that you're getting. Obviously, it's got a fuel gauge, but you want to be aware of how far you can go at a time and when you're going to need to start being prepared for gas stops, things of that nature. Get prepared for that stuff so you can plan ahead. Obviously, that's kind of an obvious one. You're going to want to know how much gas your bike holds, obviously, and this is 3.5. I think the M8s overall get pretty good gas mileage, somewhere in the neighborhood up of around like 40 miles to a gallon, I think. 40, 45, maybe 50, depending on how you're riding. So even though guys are going to say, you know, oh, it needs a bigger tank, this and that, 3.5 gallons, I mean, come on, depending on how you ride, you get 140 miles to a tank. You're going to want to stop eventually somewhere in there, I would assume. Next thing to think about is these handlebars, man. Like I said, I had to adjust them and pull them forward, but something about these handlebars has a pretty big vibration through these. I've had other people tell me too that they feel that vibration through these handlebars, so it must be something that is specific to this. I don't know if there's like no bushings or no dampeners in there. It'd be nice if there was, because there's these little pretty noticeable vibrations through this thing, through acceleration. I do plan to swap them out eventually, so hopefully that reduces that. All right, so I'm coming off a light right now, taking it up into first. I took that a little longer than normal, but first into second, it's just, I don't know, it's a very noticeable vibration that I have not felt in a lot of other bikes. I haven't felt it in a lot of the other M8s either. So I don't know if it's just kind of the style of this mini ape that sends that vibration up through there. I'm really not sure. If anybody knows what's going on in there, let me know, because it's kind of annoying. Now, one thing I'm noticing now is in the sun, something to consider is this gauge is not super visible actually. Not something I've super had a problem with just yet, but I'm really noticing it right now. I'm like, I gotta move my head around to really kind of see my numbers of the gauge and stuff like that. A little bit better when it's shaded out, so that's something to consider. So as we're starting to dwindle this list down, I would say another thing you want to consider obviously is the price of this bike. I believe MSRP of this bike is now $16,599, $16,599. Colors, ABS options, all those different things are going to play some factors into there, obviously. So the price point, it is what it is. You got to take it into consideration no matter what bike you're buying. If you're looking at Harleys, obviously you're going to have the Softail standard below this at a little bit less price. You're going to have the Lowrider S at a little bit more price, a little more features and stuff like that. So, I mean, you just got to find the price point that you want for the bike that you want, regardless of whatever bike it is. So, price, always something to take into consideration. You're looking at $16,599 on this one, but honestly, I haven't seen them anywhere near MSRP recently. Prices are a little out of control. I'm seeing these things from anywhere from, I don't know, maybe MSRP all the way up to, I've seen them 18, 19, even used ones. 18, 19,000 out the door. You might be looking at 20,000, which is kind of totally absurd, but who knows? I don't know, man. So that's kind of the bulk and majority of things that I would say you want to kind of know about this bike. Take into consideration when considering this bike. Some of it is kind of standard across any motorcycle really, but some of that stuff that's really specific to this bike that you want to make sure that you're aware of. Again, just to recap, very stripped down, very basic, very minimal, no luggage, no stuff up front. Gonna have to make a little bit of changes. Not the greatest ergos in my opinion. You're gonna make some changes there, but everything's good with the power, handling, comfort, suspension, all that stuff is pretty good. Really, the best advice I would probably give in a more general sense is really just consider and evaluate the type of riding and areas that you want to ride in, type of riding that you really want to ride in, then evaluate the bike. Does the bike align with exactly what you want to do with it? Give it a test ride. If all those check off the boxes, then hey, you know, go for it. For me, that was the case. That's how I kind of evaluated it. I was like, I love the look of it. I think it's going to accomplish everything that I personally and specifically want to do with it in the ways I want to do it. Went ahead, pulled the trigger. So if anybody has any other questions on the bike and my experience with it so far, make sure you drop it down in the comments. Anything I did not cover or forgot to cover, questions like that, certainly let me know down in the comments, and I will hopefully be able to go ahead and address those for you. But I do believe that is going to wrap this one up for now. This was a pretty awesome day of riding out into Lancaster, Pennsylvania, to Springhouse Brewery, to Lancaster Harley Davidson. Now we're headed back into the city through the main line on Route 30. A lot of good sights and sounds. Hope you guys enjoyed this conversation. If so, make sure you go ahead and like this video and subscribe to the channel. Drop a comment down there, and as always, we will catch you on the next one. Make it a good one, guys. This is the Moto John. We'll see you all on down the road.